Welcome again, folks, to another module that I'm going to speak on. It has to do with careers, and I'd like to use it as a bridge into transitioning to some topics on training, especially initial training. But it will have a connection with some of the future modules and lessons that I want to offer to you having to do with training. Now, while I'm talking about the initial part of this presentation, I'm leaving this slide up here too for you to consider any kind of remarks, any kind of questions. And this is a module that is going to probably be sensitive, maybe even controversial to a number of people. But I'm also going to preface it with the fact that this is my experience, especially over the last 4 and 5 years, where there has been a wave of this abnormally high hiring in combination with people getting airline jobs with minimal experience, even lower standards to qualify for employment, coming from mainly simple aircraft operations to advanced complex operations. So what I want to emphasize here is just the truth that this is a big leap for many of us, not only as an individual going through training, but for instructors, for line pilots as new pilots come out into line operation. But keep in mind, some of this recent hiring over the last 4 years, some airlines have hired well over 1,000 on up into, in some cases, up to 2,000 pilots a year. Absorbing that kind of number into a pilot force is a very, very difficult transition. That has been unheard of from past history. And where you are having that much of a pressure on the system of gradual training over time for a smaller number of people, this is what has led to some of the recent incidences in the last few years. Some of them very serious, some of them almost catastrophes. So enough said on that, but I am going to emphasize that this is a session that will cover some of those areas and try to do our best to preclude those kinds of things, or at least give especially new hires an opportunity to have some additional tools which I will make available and recommend in the future. Now, I put this picture out here, folks, because I think it just represents a lot of what you previously would have gone through to get to the point that you get hired by an airline. But it's not over at that point. And the thing that I would like to really emphasize, especially for those of you that come from some flight schools that have given you training as a private pilot, an instrument, a commercial, and then a certified instructor, you're in less complex airplanes. Now, if you go to a regional or wherever you get your flying experience after that, there's all different kinds of varieties of complexities to an aircraft. And some of them will be a nice transition for you into the major airline, the legacy airlines with regional carriers. But other ways of coming through, you may not have any exposure to the auto flight director systems, which are complex, have so much information that most pilots aren't aware of, even after training. But the biggest hurdle is being able to learn how to operate, learn where information is, and how to use it. It makes no difference whether you're flying automatically on autopilot, or which is most of the time, or you're flying manually to bring up the proper presentations. I'll talk a little bit more about the instrumentation that's involved in automatic flight systems, flight director systems, automated flight director systems. But I want to share a story with you that just happened to me recently. I happened to be getting an eye exam, and the doctor made a compliment about my eyesight. And she said, "What have you done for a living?" She knew that I was old, I guess. But in any case, I told her, that I had an airline pilot career. And she said, "Oh, my receptionist is now going through training at a flight school to become an airline pilot. She wants to be an airline pilot." She said, "Do you mind talking to her when you leave?" I said, No, I will." So anyway, I visited with this young lady who had just completed the commercial portion of her pilot certifications. So as I was continuing to have a talk with her, which she was very interested in, I just said, somewhere along the way here, see if you can get exposed to some training on advanced auto flight director systems that the airlines operate, because most of what you're going to be doing is flying in that kind of mode of operation. At that point, she became so dejected. I was really concerned for just her emotional state at that point. She said, "We don't fly? You don't manually fly?" I said, "Well, that's part of what you're going to do, but you'll do very little of that compared to operating on autopilot and having the airplane operate in an automated function." And that is what really concerned her, to the point that she did not realize it. That was a big thing. She just did not realize that that was going to be where she was eventually going to settle if she became an airline pilot in that kind of environment. So what I'm trying to impart to you is, do your best to be exposed to some of these advanced systems even before you get to airline training. And I'll have some more information on that. As a matter of fact, I'll even have some opportunities for you to be educated in some of those areas. So what I want to touch on again with you seeing this depiction is that some of these incidences that have happened in recent years here, some of them involving some serious safety issues, don't necessarily have to do with new pilots, but it has to do with the fact that these automated flight director systems are not being operated with knowledge and ability to decipher information in a timely manner. And that's what I really want you to be aware of. That's what I'm going to give you opportunities to go to areas where you can get some of this information and learn more about this system. Because I can tell you, it's my experience and the experience of any other instructor that's taken on new hires for an airline. When you're training in this phase of flight training, this is a complicated area, and to be able to integrate doing this at the same time you're having to go through all the other syllabus requirements to become an operational pilot, it's limited in its opportunity to know the system even half as well as you should. So what I want to do is emphasize to you that this is complex. It requires a great deal of effort to learn how to not only operate this system, but where to look to see that it is operating the way you're asking it to do, and know where to look for that information. So with that, I just want to end it with this, gang. This top area here that you see is, this is an Airbus 320. This is their cockpit presentation. It's a picture of it now, and the bottom part here is the mode control panel, the EFIS for a 737, and then what is also depicted here is the the sorry, I was looking for my cursor. But what is also depicted here is the primary flight director, which you see on the left, the nav display in the middle, and what both aircraft have is an FMC, which is another piece of information that's integrated and is involved in the operation of the aircraft. That same flight management computer that you see in the bottom right hand side here is the same one that is in the Airbus. So I'm going to conclude this lesson at this point here, gang. The big thing that I want to get across to you is that this information on approaching training is so important that this information, this knowledge, this ability to be able to operate this system efficiently takes a lot of study. It takes a lot of tactile time to learn it. And then the big challenge is taking it into an operational environment in the entire three-dimensional egg of airspace. So it's a vertical profiles that you have to be able to become knowledge in, the lateral profiles, and the management of aircraft operations with the system and tools that operate the aircraft. So I'll be covering a lot of this here in the future, but what I want you to understand, gang, is that just getting on with an airline is the beginning of where the real rubber meets the road on being able to operate safely and proficiently. Let me just add this slide as well in closing with this particular module. And you're going to see this again because this is something that I think you need to incorporate in your mind, that this becomes so ingrained it's automatic. All airlines, all pilot experiences that I've had with airlines, when you look at flight operations manuals and some of the creed, or I'll call it the commandments as well, for airline pilots, there are some priorities that need to be established in order. Number one is safety. You always have to consider what you're doing to be safe. There's a lot of different things that can enter into that one regime. The second is passenger comfort. Now, passenger comfort doesn't mean temperature, it does mean that, but it doesn't mean that it is solely about the environment. What it is about how you operate the aircraft. The ideal flight is that when a passenger doesn't have to feel they're in flight. Now, it takes the environmental conditions to make that perfect. But the point is this: whatever you do smoothly. You don't do abruptly. Now, expanding on this point just a bit, when we talk about being smooth in how you operate the aircraft, that mainly is involved when you're manually flying the aircraft. Making turns would be nice, smooth, and coordinated. The flight operation is of the aircraft when you're flying manually. Just be smooth, slow at what you do. Anticipate moves so that you can do that. And I would suggest for those of you prior to even getting with an airline, when you're learning to fly, fly as if you had passengers with you in an airplane and you are flying as smoothly as you can. Now, that also happens when an autopilot's on. I mean, there's various things, and I go into more detail, but I'll give you one example for airline pilots when the autopilot's on, and you may have to use the speed brake in flight for descents or some other reason. You can use that speed brake and bring it back very slowly where passengers hardly notice it until it gets to a point where there's just a little bit of noise and vibration. But very often you may have experienced on some flights, and this is the thing you need to understand with passenger comfort, you don't abruptly bring the speed brake back because the airplane kind of does a jump, and it certainly creates a tension in the cabin for passengers that are normally a little weary about flying. So that's what I mean by passenger comfort. Certainly, one of the things that can get away from you too when it comes to passenger comfort is a constant awareness on cabin temperature. So it's very easy to just kind of set controls and leave them where they are, but during a flight, they need to be constantly adjusted for passenger comfort in the cabin. But again, I want to emphasize the main point what I'm making here is how you operate the aircraft. Most of the four areas of safety, passenger comfort, efficient operation, and profitability all have a blend. And as we talk about this next priority, priority 3, which is efficient operation, which includes something that would be kind of typical practices, typical techniques depending on the environment. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that relates to efficient operation is keeping the flaps in the wing in a clean configuration as long as possible. And that generally, most of the approaches you'll make in this endeavor will be under visual conditions such that you have a lot more latitude than you have when you're having operational control and instrument conditions, especially at larger airports. But some of these practices of how you operate the aircraft in the approach and landing environment can go a long way for efficient operation. But it's also things like selecting altitudes. Now, dispatch does a great job with that. The practices now with dispatch, they have excellent means of information to be able to choose best routes and best altitudes. But nonetheless, there's going to be conditions that'll come up during flight that you may have an opportunity to have a smoother flight in a condition that wasn't necessarily anticipated prior to the flight. And again, going to that last priority, which is profitability of how you operate the aircraft. And I touched on it when I talked about flap configuration, especially for young people or new individuals in operating the aircraft. You have to get a feel for and know how your aircraft operates and responds. And that's when experienced people that you're flying with can help you with those techniques. But every minute that you can save on a flight, every opportunity you have to do something like a single engine taxi versus two engines operating for a taxi, all these little things that add up to maybe saving 50 gallons of fuel. These are the kinds of things that add up when you take an operation of the airline over the period of a day where you have as many as 4,000 flights or more. All that adds up. Every $20, every $15, every $5 that you can save on how you operate your aircraft goes a long way for profitability for your company. That's one of the great challenges of being an airline pilot, is that you have an obligation, if you're willing to accept it, if you're willing to make a high priority of it, to help your airline with profitability. Fuel costs are probably one of the biggest costs that are associated with the operation of the aircraft, and everything that you can do to help in that saving of a few dollars here and a few dollars there goes a long way to helping your company's profitability. But the most important thing, as you see in the last comment here, is that in the end, you're not going to compromise profitability with the priorities of 1, 2, and 3. The priorities are in order of importance. They all can have an opportunity to blend on almost all flights, and good professional pilots will attempt to do that. Okay, gang, that ends this session.